Everyone saw the way I stood frozen in that courthouse parking lot, but no one knew the storm that had brought me here. Strangers calling out numbers 15,000 going once, 15,000 going twice. The auctioneer's voice bouncing off. The concrete walls like a cruel echo, and I kept asking myself, how did I end up here? My mind kept flashing back to the day Karen Whitmore, the president of our HOA, decided the windows she herself had approved were now suddenly illegal, she thought. She could bury me in fines and paperwork. She thought she could take my home and my peace. But Karen made one mistake. She didn't know I keep everything, every letter, every threat, every note from those miserable HOA meetings stacked neatly like ammunition. 5 years later, I was holding a $75,000 check, and the signature at the bottom belonged to Karen Whitmore herself. She never saw it coming, and she had no idea what kind of fight she had picked when she decided to take on the wrong electrician. My name is Marcus Hicks, 52 years old, a union electrician who thought I understood power until I learned there is another kind of power, the kind that hides behind clipboards and smirks the kind that thrives. On control after my divorce, I needed a place where my daughter Emma could feel safe on her weekend visits. She was 16 and already juggling enough chaos for a lifetime, so I looked for somewhere steady, somewhere peaceful. Willowbrook Estates seemed perfect, quiet streets, kids riding bikes, barbecue smoke curling from backyards in the summer. The house needed work, but that was no problem. The real issue was the old 1973 windows, thin aluminum frames that seemed designed to invite the winter. Cold inside, I researched replacements for months, looking for double-pane vinyl windows that would cut the heating bill in half and match the neighborhood's look. Then I made my first mistake. I trusted the system like a good homeowner. I filled out the architectural request form photos, specifications, contractor details, all of it. The HOA had 30 days to respond, and on day 28, I got my letter request approved, clear as daylight, signed by the architectural committee, the windows. When in smooth and perfect permits filed, inspector signed off, they looked great, and for exactly 2 weeks I thought I had won the homeowner lottery. Then Karen decided to turn my life inside out. Karen was the kind of president who treated the HOA like her private empire, real estate agent by trade, control freak by nature. Her blonde bob cut like a helmet, her leather portfolio clutched like a shield, and a smile cold enough to stop a furnace. I was flipping burgers for Emma when my phone lit up with her voice. Mr. Hicks, your unauthorized modifications are unacceptable. I told her I had written approval, and she cut me off saying, approval was conditional pending final board review. I stared at my letter, and there was nothing about conditions. I asked where it said that she hung up, leaving me with a Tuesday deadline to face the board. I walked into that community center with my approval letter in hand, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. Karen sat behind a folding table like she was presiding over war crimes, trials. She slid a violation notice toward me. Your window installation violates community standards. I held up the letter saying you already approved it. She said, approval doesn't guarantee compliance, and her pen scratched across a form like a knife, $500 fine due in 30 days. I looked around the room, hoping for support from my neighbors, but every eye turned away. The silence in that room was heavier than concrete. That was when I understood. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was making an example of me. The fine doubled every month until compliance, month 1, 500, month 2, 1,000, month 3, 2,000. I couldn't afford an attorney and I couldn't pay her ransom, either. But Karen didn't know. Electricians troubleshoot for a living. We find the short. We trace the wire. We fix the problem. And that night I decided to find the short in her system. I drove through Willowbrook, counting 47 homes with the exact same windows as mine. Not one of them had received a violation. Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood, she was running a protection racket, and I had just been marked as her newest target 2 weeks after I challenged her in that meeting. I found a certified letter in my mailbox, like a snake coiled to strike a lien notice for $2,000, the original fine buried under layers of late fees, administrative costs, and enforcement expenses, with a threat that failure to pay could Mean foreclosure. Foreclosure over windows she had approved. I called my neighbor, Janet Bennett. 73 years old with the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood. Her voice shook as she told me Karen had already asked her questions about my finances, my visitors. My daughter Janet admitted Karen had done the same to her last year over some garden gnomes, and she had moved them rather than fight. I stayed up all night reading Ohio property law and found something that made my pulse. Race HOA liens require a 30-day cure notice before filing. Karen had skipped that step. Her threat was built on quicksand. The next morning, I dug through the county recorder's basement until I found her fatal error. Her lien was missing 3 required documents. She thought a blue-collar electrician wouldn't know the law wrong. I filed my challenge and won my first small victory, but Karen wasn't done. She called an emergency board meeting announcing all non-conforming windows must be replaced within 60 days. I stood and told her she couldn't retroactively change approvals, that it was breach of contract, and I told her her lien was invalid. Karen's face drained of color, but her eyes burned, and in that moment I knew. This fight was just getting started. Karen struck back faster than I could blink. A collections agency started calling some outfit from Columbus called Debt Recovery Solutions, a name that felt like it was built to intimidate. They told me I owed $2,400 and they could garnish my wages, seize my bank accounts. I told them the lien was invalid. They said their client said otherwise and hung up. The calls came morning, noon, and night, and sleep became a luxury. Emma noticed on her weekend visit. She was only 16, but she saw everything. "Dad, you look exhausted. What's wrong?" I pulled her into a hug because how do you explain that the neighborhood bully is trying to steal your house that night? I turned the spare bedroom into my war room, documents on the desk, timelines covering the wall, photos of every window in the neighborhood. I mapped every violation notice like an electrician tracing a bad circuit until I saw the pattern: 47 houses with identical windows to mine. But every single violation was aimed at renters, minorities, or working-class folks. People like me, Karen's friends from the country club, got nothing more than friendly reminders. It wasn't about windows, it was about targeting. Then Karen made her big move. She hired an expensive attorney from Columbus. His letter arrived on cream-colored paper that probably cost more than I made in an hour notice of intent to foreclose, 30 days to pay or face a sheriff's sale. The words hit me like touching live wires without gloves. So I grabbed my measuring tape and camera and started walking the streets of Willowbrook house by house. I photographed every vinyl window installation, the leaves crunching under my boots as I saw the truth. Mrs. Patterson, wife of the bank. President had the same exact windows as mine, installed the same month, praised in the meeting. Minutes for improving the community 3 blocks over. Carlos Martinez got slammed with fines for the same windows. His crime was being a mechanic, and a renter, same product, different treatment. I pinned every photo on my wall, blue pins for Karen's friends, red pins for her targets. The map looked like a crime scene. Tuesday evening, Janet called in a whisper. "Marcus, I found something you need to see. Can you come quietly?" Her kitchen smelled of jasmine tea and quiet defiance. She handed me a manila folder, her hands trembling. I saved everything from when she went after my garden gnomes. I thought maybe someday someone braver might need it. Inside the folder was dynamite disguised as paper emails between Karen and board members. One line made my breath stop. "We need to be strategic target renters and blue-collar types. First, they're less likely to have legal resources." That was my smoking gun. I asked Janet why she didn't fight. She said, because she was a 73-year-old Chinese widow and no one would believe her. I spent the rest of the night studying fair housing law and discovered that what Karen was doing wasn't just HOA abuse. It was a federal violation. The next morning, I called Ohio Legal Aid. When I told them what I had, they told me to hold everything and assign me an attorney. Sarah Martinez met me 2 days later in a room that smelled like fresh coffee and possibility. She spread my photos out like a poker hand and said, "Marcus, this is textbook discrimination. Karen had picked the wrong electrician, because electricians know how to trace problems to their source. Most people see a single violation. You documented an entire corrupt system. Karen's lawyer pushed for expedited foreclosure, claiming I was a threat to the community. We had 4 days until the hearing. Emma found me surrounded by legal briefs and asked if someone was trying to take our house. I told her about the bully who kept stealing lunch money until someone told the principal tomorrow. I'm telling the principal, I said. She nodded. Good Friday morning was cold and gray. I carried 3 boxes of evidence into the courthouse and saw Karen across the hall. Her smirk said she thought I was just a scared blue-collar worker. But Sarah stood like a gunslinger and dropped the first bombshell. Your Honor, we're filing a federal fair housing counterclaim with 5 years of documented selective enforcement. Judge Morrison's eyebrows shot up. Karen's attorney went pale. Then Sarah read Karen's own email about targeting renters and blue-collar residents. The courtroom went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. This wasn't just about foreclosure anymore. This was about federal discrimination. The judge recessed for 30 minutes. Karen's lawyer spent the break on his phone, probably calling his insurance. When court resumed, the judge dismissed the foreclosure with prejudice, ordered an investigation, and referred the matter to federal prosecutors. Karen's smirk was gone, replaced with panic as she realized this had just become criminal. Walking out of that courthouse felt like the first clear day after a storm, but deep down I knew desperate people do desperate things, and Karen was nowhere near done. The harassment began almost before I made it home. Anonymous complaints started pouring into the city about unlicensed electrical work at my house. Code enforcement showed up 3 times in 2 weeks each visit, costing me lost work time even though they found nothing wrong. Someone reported my truck for commercial vehicle violations. Tickets appeared like magic on my windshield even when I was parked legally. And then came the phone calls, heavy breathing, hang-ups, muffled threats telling me to drop the lawsuit or regret it. I might have been able to handle that. But then they dragged Emma into it one afternoon. She called me from school, her voice shaking. Dad, the guidance counselor said someone called about neglect at home. They're asking questions about you. I sat in my evidence room that night staring at 5 years of Karen's abuse. Every phone record, every violation, every financial trap she'd set for people. And that's when I found the crack in her empire buried in property tax records. Karen owned 3 rental houses in Willowbrook through an LLC called KW Holdings, and none of them had been disclosed to the HOA board, which was a violation of their own conflict of interest rules. Those houses had the exact same windows I had been fined for. Not just similar, identical, same manufacturer, same color, same grid pattern installed by the same contractor. She had fined other people for something she herself was profiting from. I called Sarah Martinez and told her what I'd found. She went silent for a moment before telling me, Marcus, this just went from discrimination to a federal RICO investigation. Karen wasn't just abusing HOA power, she was running a criminal enterprise. The more I dug, the worse. It got KW Holdings had bought 3 properties in 4 years, all within months of those homes getting slammed with violations. Each owner elderly, minority, or working class, each family driven to sell far below market value to avoid foreclosure. Karen or her husband swooped in with cash offers and bought them cheap. One property, the Patel's home, had been purchased $43,000 below market, and it too had those so-called non-compliant windows. Then I found insurance records showing they had collected $8,000 for replacing those windows after claiming storm damage, all while calling them a violation. In HOA meetings, the scale of the scam was staggering. Over 4 years, they'd acquired $400,000 worth of property for 60 cents on the dollar, profiting $160,000 plus rental income. The map on my wall looked like the blueprint of a heist. Every targeted homeowner fit the same profile, and the financial trail was obvious. I called Sarah again, this time at 6 in the morning. She answered groggy, and I told her I'd found the mother lode. She listened quietly, then said, Marcus, you just handed federal prosecutors a career-making case that morning. Sarah called an emergency meeting at her law office and introduced me to a forensic accountant, a housing discrimination expert, and an assistant U.S. attorney named Jennifer Walsh. The plan was simple but devastating: build an airtight pattern of criminal activity, prove racketeering, show intent, and line up victims willing to testify. Janet Bennett became our secret weapon. She still had contact with families Karen had driven out of Willowbrook. We started making calls one by one. The stories poured in. The Patels had been broken. By escalating fines, Maria Santos left for Puerto Rico. The Johnsons moved to Kentucky. Every story matched the same pattern: violation, harassment, forced sale, KW Holdings purchase. The Patels cried when they realized it hadn't been random bad luck, but a calculated campaign. David Rodriguez, the housing expert, showed us stats proving 93% of major violations targeted minority or working-class residents, 0 against Karen's social circle. Walsh coordinated with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, who already had wire fraud and mail fraud alerts on the Whitmores. This was bigger than anyone had guessed. My garage turned into a war room. Tables covered with timelines, property records, bank statements, and testimonies. Emma helped. After school cross-checking dates and amounts, she looked at me one evening and said, "Dad, Karen's like a landlord who breaks her own buildings so she can buy them cheap," and I told her that's exactly what she was doing. Sarah's lawsuit read, like a thriller. RICO charges wire, fraud mail, fraud tax evasion, and housing discrimination. We had enough to bury Karen legally, but Walsh wanted more. She wanted Karen to feel the pressure. So we drafted a settlement offer that would force her to either pay huge damages and resign or face 20 years in federal prison. Karen had no idea that every day she delayed was another day the case against her got stronger. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in, because the next morning I spotted a rusted Camry parked across from my house, a man inside with a camera snapping photos of Emma getting on the school bus. I walked straight to his window, gravel crunching under my boots, and asked why he was photographing my 16-year-old daughter. He blew out a cloud of cigarette smoke and said, "Just doing a job, pal." Public street, public photography, then drove off without answering. But I didn't need confirmation. By noon, the guy had been to 3 of my neighbors asking questions about whether I drank too much, whether Emma looked neglected, whether strange visitors came to my house. Janet Bennett called me furious. "Marcus, some man was here snooping," I told him, to get off my property before I called the police. The pattern was obvious. Karen was trying to smear me, but she underestimated how much Willowbrook had changed since the case began. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street called that evening to tell me, she told the PI, I was the best neighbor she'd ever had. Carlos Martinez said he told the guy that anyone messing with me was messing with the whole neighborhood. Karen had spent years dividing people, but now they were standing together. The next blow came when Child Protective Services showed up, a social worker named Mrs. Henderson with a clipboard and concerned eyes. She said they'd received an anonymous tip about Emma being malnourished and my home being unstable because of ongoing legal issues. I invited her in and showed her my evidence room walls lined with timelines, boxes of legal documents, photos, and research. She looked around and said, "Whoever filed this either doesn't know you or is being malicious." She closed her notepad and told me the case was dismissed, and between you and me, keep fighting the good fight. The very next day, someone filed a complaint with the state licensing board about my electrical business, claiming I had no credentials and did unsafe work. The inspector, Pete Kowalski, a 20-year veteran, reviewed my license permits and references and told me, "Marcus, your paperwork's cleaner than most contractors. I've seen this is a frivolous complaint filed with malicious intent, and I'm putting that on the record." By Friday, Karen tried to have my work truck towed from my driveway, saying it violated parking ordinances. The towing company called me first. I told them to call the police, and 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez was writing Karen a citation for filing false reports. The neighbors gathered on their porches to watch Karen try to explain herself to a uniformed cop. By Sunday, Sarah Martinez told me Karen's attorney had been calling daily about a settlement starting at $10,000, then $50,000 plus her resignation. But the real sign of panic came when Emma saw her driving past our house at dawn, staring at the federal evidence warning signs Sarah had posted in our windows. Karen's final gambit, that. Week came in the form of Officer Rodriguez knocking on my door saying Karen had filed for a restraining order, claiming I had been stalking her and making threats in court. Karen sat beside her fourth attorney, dressed to look like a trembling victim. Her lawyer said I had been photographing her property, following her to work, and making threatening calls. The judge asked for evidence, and Sarah handed over a thumb drive showing GPS log security footage and phone records proving I had been at job sites or at home every time she claimed otherwise. The judge denied her petition and recommended the prosecutor review her for perjury, walking out. I thought maybe we'd seen the last of her, but that evening Emma called from home saying someone had broken in. Nothing stolen, just my evidence room, torn apart, boxes, ripped open photos, ripped from the walls. The computers smashed, but they hadn't found the backups hidden in my closet or the duplicates at Sarah's office. Officer Rodriguez said this wasn't random. Someone was looking for documents, and I told her there was only one person desperate enough to risk felony breaking and entering. Karen's desperation only made her sloppier, because the next day I was served with papers saying KW Holdings was suing me for defamation and interference with business. Sarah actually laughed, saying, "Marcus, she just admitted she owns KW Holdings, and that our investigation is hurting her business. Now federal prosecutors can use her own lawsuit as proof of criminal intent." But the most dangerous move came Thursday evening when a brick smashed through our front window with a note tied to it that read, "Drop the lawsuit or lose more than windows." I called 911, and within an hour, FBI agents were at my door taking photos and telling me this was now witness intimidation, a separate felony carrying up to 20 years. The next morning, Agent Kim called to say they had arrested Karen Whitmore at 6A. On charges including racketeering mail fraud, wire fraud, housing discrimination, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. She was facing 40 years in federal prison, and for the first time in years, Willowbrook could breathe. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 on a Thursday night, and it felt like Christmas morning, and Judgment Day rolled into one. Word had spread about Karen's federal arrest faster than gossip at a church potluck, and the parking lot was packed a half hour before the meeting. Cars lined the street for 3 blocks, and I spotted license plates from neighboring counties. The community center buzzed with a kind of electricity I'd never felt before. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were standing in clusters, trading Karen horror stories like veterans swapping war tales. Janet Bennett waved me to the front row where she had saved seats for us, like we were about to watch a Broadway show. Channel 6 News was there along, with a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch, and even the county commissioner Sarah Martinez walked in, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing a look that told me she had come for the kill shot. At exactly 7, the remaining board members shuffled, in looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Helen Morrison, the secretary, no relation to the judge, called the meeting to order, her voice shaking as she read from a statement due to criminal charges filed by federal prosecutors. Karen Whitmore has resigned all HOA positions effective immediately. The board extends apologies to any residents who experienced inappropriate enforcement actions. The room went dead silent except for the clicks of camera shutters. Then Sarah stood her heels. Tapping against the linoleum like a countdown, she told the crowd she was here representing me and every family Karen had targeted over the last 8 years. And she reached into her briefcase, pulling out a settlement check that seemed to glow. Under the lights, $75,000 in damages to me for harassment, discrimination, and attempted theft of property through fraudulent enforcement. The room erupted in applause, neighbors hugging each other. Emma, clapping so hard her hands had to hurt, but Sarah wasn't done. She announced Karen was permanently banned from any HOA leadership position in the state. KW Holdings was dissolved, and every property it had acquired would be returned to fair market value through court-supervised sales. She told them the case had set legal precedent in Ohio. No board member could ever again use HOA authority for personal financial gain without risking federal prosecution. Then I stood my work boots loud on the floor as I walked to the microphone. and looked out over a crowd that felt different from the first time I had faced them. Back then, their faces had been full of fear. Now they were lit with pride. I told them 8 months ago I thought I was just fighting one woman over some windows. But tonight, I realized we were fighting for something bigger. We proved that ordinary people can beat corruption if they document everything, if they stand together, if they refuse to back down. The applause turned into a standing ovation that went on for minutes. Even the county commissioner was clapping after the meeting. The news cameras caught the check presentation, and a reporter asked me what I'd tell other homeowners facing HOA abuse. I told them to document everything, build alliances. And remember, bullies count on you staying isolated, but communities win when they stand together. The celebration spilled into the parking lot. Neighbors already talking about holding a Freedom from Harassment Day festival. Carlos Martinez announced. He was running for HOA president on a platform of transparency. Mrs. Patterson offered to host a legal rights workshop. And Emma hugged me, telling me she was proud not just because I'd saved our house, but because I'd fought for everyone I looked. Around at these people, laughing instead of whispering, planning instead of fearing, and I knew she was right. This wasn't just about windows or money. This was about making sure no one in Willowbrook ever had to be afraid again. 6 months later, the same windows that started this whole war were catching the afternoon sunlight in my backyard as Emma practiced her college application presentation. The settlement money had done more than fill my bank account. It had changed. The whole community, $25,000, went straight into the Willowbrook Estates Scholarship Fund, and Emma had just won $500 for her essay about standing up to injustice, which she planned to put toward her pre-law program at Ohio State. She read part of it aloud. My father taught me that documentation beats intimidation. Community beats corruption, and ordinary people can make extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent. I felt pride swell in my chest, like good voltage. Flowing through clean wiring, another $15,000 had gone to playground improvements. We held a ribbon cutting last week, and more than 300 residents came. Kids who had spent years tiptoeing around Karen's threats now swung freely. While parents organized movie nights and block parties without fear, Carlos Martinez had won the HOA presidency by a landslide, and his first acts were monthly financial reports and conflict of interest disclosures. He even commissioned a bronze plaque for the community center honoring those who stand against corruption. Janet Bennett now gave garden tours, proudly showing off the gnomes Karen once tried to ban. She told visitors Marcus taught us that standing up to bullies isn't just about yourself. It's about protecting the next person who might get targeted. $10,000 from the settlement went into a legal defense fund that has already helped 3 families in nearby counties fight HOA abuse. Sarah Martinez joked that my case had started a cottage industry in HOA accountability law, and other attorneys now reference the Hendrick precedent whenever they fought discriminatory enforcement. Karen's downfall read like a prosecutor's cautionary tale she took. A plea bargain for 3 years in federal prison, plus 5 years probation. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. KW Holdings dissolved all properties sold at supervised auctions, and the Patels used restitution money to buy back their home. Mr. Patel called me saying they never thought they'd see justice. Ohio lawmakers passed the HOA Transparency Act, requiring conflict disclosure, limiting foreclosure authority, and giving renters rights in HOA communities. I testified at the signing sitting beside the governor. My electrician business had tripled, partly because people wanted to hire the guy who took down a corrupt HOA, but mostly because word spreads when you solve problems instead of creating them. The first annual Willowbrook Freedom Festival was set for next month with live music, food trucks, and booths sharing HOA reform resources. Emma was running a voter registration drive because she'd learned that civic engagement beats passive compliance every single time. My old evidence room had become a kind of neighborhood museum. Parents brought their kids to see the timeline and documents that dismantled an 8-year reign of fear. And I'd tell them, this is what happens when good people document bad. Behavior, the sweetest victory came when a young couple with 2 kids bought the Martinez house and knocked on my door asking about the neighborhood. And I could tell them honestly, this is a community where people look out for each other. That's what we built from the ashes of Karen's corruption. The story of Willowbrook did not stay in Willowbrook. The HOA Abuse Survivors website that Sarah helped me launch was now getting 50,000 visitors a month. People from all over the country downloading template letters, guides on filing complaints, and lists of state laws. My inbox was full of messages from strangers telling me they had faced their own Karens and now felt like they had a fighting chance. News outlets kept calling wanting interviews. Some wanted to talk about the case, others about the new law that came from it. I told them all the same thing. It started with one man trying to save his house, but it became a lesson in what happens when a community unites and refuses to be intimidated. Videos of the HOA meeting had gone viral, neighbors cheering, holding up that settlement. Check the standing ovation, people said. It gave them goosebumps, and some told me they cried watching it. Whole neighborhoods in other states started holding their own Freedom from Harassment days and sending photos of banners and block parties. There were rallies at state capitals where residents demanded laws like the HOA Transparency Act, and legislators were actually listening. Sarah told me we had unknowingly sparked a movement for HOA reform across the country. Carlos Martinez got invited to speak at a housing rights conference, and he came back saying people in California, Florida, and Texas were quoting lines from my speech as proof that ordinary homeowners could win my case. Became the example lawyers used when convincing their clients not to give up. Janet Bennett's garden became a symbol of quiet resistance, with visitors leaving little gnome figurines at her fence like offerings to a local hero. Emma started writing articles for a youth civics blog telling the story from her perspective, and it reached kids her age who had no idea HOA abuse even existed. She said, "If you're old enough to see unfairness, you're old enough to speak up and act my electrician." Work took me to neighborhoods far outside our county, and in almost every one, someone would recognize my name or my story. I'd be rewiring a breaker box, and a homeowner would quietly ask how we managed to beat them, and I'd tell them the truth. It's not about being fearless. It's about being relentless. It's about documenting every single thing and never letting them isolate you. More and more people were refusing to sign settlement, gag orders, and instead sharing their cases online. The tide was turning one story at a time. Emma and I attended the first National HOA Reform Summit, where activists, attorneys, and even some reformed board members came together to push for changes in federal housing law. I walked into that conference hall and saw a giant banner with my windows on it and the words, "Documentation beats intimidation," and I realized this had gone far beyond my little street in Willowbrook. This was bigger than me, bigger than Karen. This was a movement. I still remember the day the summit ended, and Emma and I drove home, the autumn sun sinking low behind the trees, casting a golden light over the streets of Willowbrook. Kids were riding their bikes, parents chatting on porches, and for the first time in years, there was no tension in the air. No one was afraid of a letter in the mailbox or a knock on the door. I pulled into our driveway and looked at the same house Karen once tried to take from us, the same windows she called illegal glinting. In the fading light, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Patel. He sent a photo of his family standing in front of their restored home with the caption, "We are finally home again. Thank you." I thought about the night I stood in this driveway staring at a brick through our front window, the threat tied to it, and how far we had come. Since then, Emma came out carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate and said, "Dad, you know what I like best about all this?" I asked what she smiled and said, "It's not just that we won. It's that nobody here is afraid anymore." And she was right. That was the real victory. The scholarship fund was helping kids chase their dreams. The playground echoed with laughter. Carlos was running the HOA with transparency, and the legal defense fund was still helping families fight back. I knew Karen's name would be remembered here, not as a leader but as a warning, and I knew our story would keep traveling far beyond these streets. I walked into my old evidence room now, more of a community archive, and ran my hand along the binders and photos, each one a piece of the puzzle that had taken down her empire. I thought about all the people still out there facing their own battles, and I knew exactly what I'd tell. Them never let them make you feel small, never fight alone, and never stop keeping records, because the truth is your greatest weapon, and once you shine a light on corruption, it can't hide forever. Emma leaned in the doorway and said, "Dad, you ready? For the Freedom Festival." I grabbed my jacket and we stepped outside into a neighborhood alive with music and food and laughter. Neighbors waving as we walked toward the park, the smell of barbecue in the air and kids running with balloons, and I realized this was the ending we had built together. Not in a courtroom, not in a board meeting, but right here in the open where everyone could see that fear had been replaced with trust, and division, replaced with community. Sometimes justice comes as a check with your enemy's signature on it. But the best kind of justice comes when the people who stood with you keep standing together long after the fight is over. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.